Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video for the Fantasy Premier League season 2022-2023. So in this video I'm going to be breaking down a updated draft of the team selection for the all-important and ever fast approaching game week 1. I've made a couple of changes that I wanted to showcase and share with you guys, as well as the second half of the video talking about a couple of options that we could put in place of some of the starting 11 I've chosen so far, or potential early transfer options as well. So we'll jump into the starting 11 and the bench here. So the first two, well in fact the only real two major changes I've made to the draft are Mason Mount in the £8 million midfielder mark instead of Bruno Guimaraes of Newcastle, and I've put Aymeric Laporte in instead of João Cancelo of Manchester City. So a couple of reasons really for these moves. After the initial draft and the fixture analysis video I did in between these two draft videos, really I kind of came to the conclusion that having two Newcastle players was something I wanted to solve. So that was problem number one. Problem number two was that I had 1 million in the bank, essentially by going for a 4 million defender in the bench slot number 2. So by doing that, I wasn't willing to go to, I don't think, a 7 million midfielder. Rafinha would have been a possibility or an option based on him not getting transferred out of Leeds, but it looks like he's heading to Barcelona. So I wanted to get that second 8 million midfielder in. The only way of doing that was, of course, gathering that extra 1 million. So taking a look at the squad prior to Cancelo coming out, we'd have to have taken 1 million either from Trent, Chilwell. We would have had to taken it from either Salah, Luis Diaz again. He was already the 8 million mark, so what we wouldn't want to be reducing him down to a 7 million. Neto down to a 4.5 again is not something we'd consider because we've already got one playing 4.5 million midfielder on the bench. We don't want two of them. And also Gabriel Jesus and Haaland were my kind of two first choice strikers really, and I didn't want to be reducing Haaland down, and certainly not Jesus, as there's no one really at 7 million that's sticking out from a forward line perspective. So really that million could only come from Cancelo. I could have again also reduced arguably Trippier down to another 4 million defender, but I didn't see it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way the structure was looking. It felt like it was tearing the team apart too much. Whereas Cancelo to Laporte made the most logical sense, just because we're covering a City asset, we're covering the City defence. We've also got the capability and the threat that Laporte offers versus Cancelo. Now, the statistics won't back up that Laporte is better than Cancelo by any stretch of the imagination. He won't have anywhere near the same XG or XA, but what he will do is he does offer that set piece threat where he can win a header, he can score a goal, but from that defensive perspective, if Cancelo goes and gets a clean sheet with no attacking returns and so does Laporte, then ultimately in this squad we've matched the output almost of Cancelo. You could argue there might be some bonus points here or there, but that was the kind of, it's a minimal amount of risk for a potential larger upside in Mason Mount or another £8 million midfielder playing for us. So I think I've helped solve the two major problems I discovered, almost you could say, across the creation of those previous videos, and that will lead me into kind of also the other two, let's say, nailed on picks in comparison to the previous video in the bench options. Now I don't like to give this too much thought because during pre-season so much changes in terms of transfers, in terms of people playing and possibly getting injured, meaning players come into the forefront that weren't considered previously. So these two I think are going to be pretty much nailed in Andreas Pereira and Nico Williams. Andreas moving from Manchester United to Fulham means he gives us a playing option as a 4.5 million midfielder. He could maybe only score 2 to 3 points a game, but I would prefer that rather than a potential rotation risk or someone that's not going to be playing at all. And then Nico Williams, he gives us the full flexibility in terms of the budget on the starting 11 by him being priced at 4 million. And going to Forest means that he is an option. Whether or not he gets the starting lineup, gets to the starting lineup, or he gets the nod essentially for Forest is another story. We'll have to check that out. But at 4 million again, he's a playing option. So not too much thought has gone into this. It's just watch the transfer market, seeing where these players have gone, put them in my draft. The goalkeeper slot and the forward slot is still arguable. It just doesn't matter who we put in there, really. They are the price points, as the starting 11 has used the majority, well, in fact, all of the budget, if you include the bench options there as well. So moving on to the second half of the video, where we're discussing 6 players here that I've kind of narrowed down and selected from the original large pool of players that I had in the initial team selection draft, and ultimately brought it down to a smaller playing field, should we say, in terms of options for us. So I'll go through each player and kind of the reasons why they're on this list and the thought process, really. So the first 2 that I will talk about here are Sancho and Rashford, just because both of them being United players. I will caveat everything I'm about to say, though, is purely, well, not purely, but some of it is on the basis that I am a Manchester United fan, and also a bit knee-jerk based on the 4-0 victory over Liverpool in pre-season that's just happened. So we'll start with Jayden first of all. I think we've always known, you know, as football fans, essentially, regardless of who you support, this young man has clearly got a lot of talent. He wasn't necessarily unlocked properly since he's joined Manchester United, in my opinion, and I can see why Solskjaer wanted him. It just didn't necessarily seem like he knew how to play with him, or that Manchester United had no identity for him to mould towards or work towards. There was a situation where he just didn't look right. He hasn't looked right since buying him, really. He's had moments, like all Manchester United players have. They've had pockets and times of showcasing what talent they have. But I can already see good things happening under Ten Hag. Of course, being a United fan, I have consumed and watched quite a lot of content to do with pre-season and how he's bringing his Ajax philosophies over to United. But I'm liking what I'm seeing so far from the training drills, from what he's doing. I think Sancho can benefit from this managerial style. I think he's a player that wants to play in small triangle possession-based football, that we get the best creativity out of him in those areas. And I think Ten Hag's training the players at the moment psychologically and physically to be ready for how he sees the game and how he wants the game to be played. I think we're only going to see benefits coming from Sancho and Rashford, really, in the system that Ten Hag wants to implement. Again, I would say that Rashford, out of the 2 of them, if you can consider a weaker option, he is the weaker option out of the 2. Maybe his price point is justified based on that. He is $1 million cheaper. But I think them on the left and the right, respectively, could be really, really dangerous and could be something to watch. I think regardless of whether it's Martial or Cristiano in the middle, I think these 2 are going to perform. I think they're going to have the capability of cutting inside, and I think that they're going to have the crossing capability. I think Ten Hag is going to drill it into them that if the cross is not on, they keep going back to the fullback first, recycle and carry on. This is something that Manchester United haven't done for a long time. They just cross, hit and hope, thinking that Ronaldo's just going to do one of his magical leaps and score a header. It's never been on the money. It's never been right. It hasn't looked right for a long time. So yeah, I think enough said at this point. It's, you know, again, it's a lot of bias from me, really, I think, here being a United fan, and I'd love to have one of the players in the squad, but they are definitely ones to consider. So moving into Matty Cash, Aston Villa have been a team that I have considered covering or looking at, essentially, as from the Gameweek 1 perspective. I do like the look of their fixtures. I think at 5 million, Matty Cash could easily have replaced Kieran Trippier at the same price. I think Digne is also an option. All I would say is that Digne, from a defensive standpoint, seems to get a little bit more yellow cards than Matty Cash. Maybe that's because he finds it harder to track back once he gets into that more attacking position. I don't know, but he seems to make a bit more of a rash challenge. It's not to say he shouldn't be considered, because from a set piece perspective, he is arguably a lot better than Matty Cash. But I would say that when looking and comparing at heat maps, Cash gives us that perfect balance of what we like from an FPL perspective. He's up the pitch enough to be able to give the attacking outputs that we look for on a defensive asset. So I think he's a great option. I think with Sanchez, I won't spend too long on the goalkeeper section really here, but what I will say before we go into the reasons why I like Sanchez as an option, if you are newer to FPL, the kind of the biggest or one of the earliest suggestions I can give to you is that in terms of the goalkeeping position, if you are considering a 5.5 million goalkeeper to go with, the ceiling in terms of points that they score is a lot lower than the midfielders, the defenders, and the striker options. So that extra million could 100% be better used across the other positions. And I think that's why I'm still leaning towards the 4.5 million goalkeeper. I always have done in previous years. That they've always ended up being the kind of go-tos for me. It is difficult to always get the right one all the way through and at the start, but I think Sanchez and Raya offer the best fixtures for that price point from a goalkeeping perspective. So don't think it needs to cause us too much of a headache, but I definitely want to consider him as that replacement to Raya come game week 1. I've also put Reece James in there. So originally he was in a draft before. I kind of reconsidered it purely on the basis of Chelsea's transfer window. So they have now been, I think there's some news that's come out very, very recently at time of recording here that Koulibaly has been purchased from Napoli. So it solves at least one of their centre-back issues. That may of course fall through still. I don't know. I spotted it before recording that he was potentially on the move. They've also been linked with Nathan Ake. So if they get the centre-backs in that essentially are filling the void that Rudiger and Christensen left this season, I think there's less risk of Reece James having to play the right centre-back role. So Pt2 can also play that role, but he's also been linked with a move away. So if we start seeing the transfer window ramp up for Chelsea, they start making their signings, I think he is one to consider over Chilwell. Would I consider the double up? Possibly, but again, I think it comes down to the transfer window. How are they looking defensively? Have they had time to gel together? You know, Thiago Silva is 100%, you know, a fantastic player even at his age and probably can arrange and coordinate that defence regardless of who they bring in. But I still think that they need time to gel. So doubling up, I think, is a bit risky. Regardless of attacking outputs, you still would argue that you want the double clean sheet from those two. So I think it's a one or the other at this stage for me, and at the moment it is just Chilwell based on everything I've just mentioned. So we won't talk about Rashford anymore because I think realistically, like I say, we've got to see kind of more of him really. He was the weaker of the front three. Will I consider him at some point? Absolutely. I think he's at 6.5 million. He's definitely an option. And finally, I think it's worth noting Matt Doherty. So again, he's the 5 million mark. Spurs are another team that I haven't covered in the starting 11 that I did want to have a look at. I think he could equally be Perisic. In my sort of draft example, I can't quite stretch to the 5.5 million, not unless I say change Trent to a Robertson and then, you know, Trippier become Perisic, which is, you know, arguably maybe a better back four than what I've currently got. But I think based on minutes and value, 5 million for Doherty may be just on point or equal to what Perisic produces at 5.5. So from a Spurs attacking and defensive perspective, based on minutes, fitness and so on, I think Doherty gets the nod from me over Perisic, which is why he's made this player option section here. So a couple of things to consider. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on, is there anyone in this 6 that I've narrowed down? Would you replace the starting 11 with any of these 6 players? Would you consider other players? Do you think I've overlooked anybody at certain price points? Do you think the 8 million midfielder price point, having a double up on those two is the right move? Let me know your thoughts. Appreciate all the support, the comments, the likes, everything coming in so far. It's been an absolute blast so far creating content for you guys, so I'm hoping you're enjoying it. More planned, and of course throughout the season as well there'll be plenty of content to soak in. So yeah, again, appreciate all of the support so far. Please do smash a like on the video and subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.